community? Will you take me into those places where you hang with your neighbors and your family and your friends and your coworkers and your classmates? Will you take me into the forms of entertainment that you enjoy? You see, I'm not looking for partial followers. I'm not looking for people who are half committed. I'm looking for people who are willing to be fully devoted followers. I'm looking for people who have the courage and the tenacity to take me wherever they will go. I think in Mark 8, Jesus is just asking us to raise the bar. I think he's asking a lot of us. And it certainly gives us a lot to think about, doesn't it? And this is mind-blowing. There's this church in the book of Acts, and I'm going to introduce you to it in just a moment. It's one of the first churches ever. Maybe it was the size of this room. Maybe it was smaller. But those who belonged to this particular church, one of the very first Christian churches, they took Jesus at his word. And they really raised the bar. Essentially, the members of that church said, we're going to be fully devoted followers of Christ, and we're going to be obedient to our Lord, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means following him is going to cost us something. And so this morning I want to show you how this church in Acts chapter 2 came alive. And I want for us in this room to get a picture of God working here in the same manner that he's working in this Acts chapter 2 church. And so I'm going to turn there right now and pick up reading at verse 42. Acts chapter 2, verse 42. They, that is the people who belong to this particular church, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And everyone was filled with awe. Now, did you catch that? It says everyone. Not just the people in the first two rows. Everyone was filled with awe. There was, as someone said, a sense of communal expectancy. There was a shared sense of expectancy that God was going to move, and that God was going to change lives, and that God was going to work miraculously in and through that church community. Continuing with verse 43. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. How? Why? I don't know about you, but I mean, at various times in my life, I question whether miracles can actually happen. Do miracles actually take place anymore? And here it says that many miracles and miraculous signs and wonders were done within that faith community, because when you have a faith-filled community like that, you create a perfect environment for miracles and the miraculous to take place. And that's exactly what happened in this early church. Verse 44, all the believers were together, and they had everything in common. Everything in common. And that would include their property. And you say, well, wait a minute. That's pretty high-level commitment. Now, that's really raising the bar. And it's true. They really raised the bar. And it's just an indicator of how much love there was in that church community, that they cared about one another enough to see that if someone else was in need in that church community, they did what they needed to do to raise the level of that community so that nobody was in want. Verse 45. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as they had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. Every day. So here was a church community that wasn't content to meet once every 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, it wasn't enough for them. Even meeting like we are here this morning, once a week, every week, that wasn't enough for this church community. They met every single day together. Verse 46. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts. So in addition to big worship services like this, in addition to big gatherings where they all got together and there was just a celebration and support, they also got together in people's homes, in small groups, in home group communities, just like we have home groups in our church here at River City. These people were committed to doing life in community versus in isolation. And then continuing on. They continued praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So here we learn that when people came to those gatherings, whether it was a home group gathering or whether it was a larger gathering like this, when friends and family and classmates and co-workers and neighbors and skeptics came to that community and they accepted an invitation to that community, they walked away impacted. They were impacted. There was life change there. The members of the church didn't need to do some selling job to the people who were guests, because newcomers could see that there was something special, something unique, something that they'd never experienced before, either in a church or a faith community or outside of a faith community. I think that people who were guests there had this sense that this was God, that God was working through this church. And so when people from that church went out from their home groups, when they went out from their worship services, when they went back into the quote-unquote real world, they enjoyed the favor of all the people, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. People looked favorably upon the church. I don't know how many of you get the record. My wife and I get the record and we read it. And one of the most interesting sections to me is the letters to the editor. And in Friday's section, letters to the editor, there was a letter, and there's some debate that's been going on in the record over the last couple of weeks, because there was a similar letter just before we went to Holland. And basically this person is saying, you know what, churches should not be exempt from paying taxes. Churches don't really contribute to the community. Churches are in decline, so let's tax churches. I mean, if people want to meet, that's fine, but let's start taxing churches because they're all going the way of the dinosaur anyway. Why is it that people in our community, why is it that your neighbors and mine think the church doesn't make any positive contribution to the community? When we read in Acts chapter 2 that here was a church where all the people in the community looked favorably upon. Complete different scenario than you and I are dealing with today. And is the responsibility our neighbors, or is the responsibility us in the church? And I would say that it's our responsibility to change those perceptions, to show that we make a difference. They enjoyed the favor of all the people. And I can picture the conversations going back and forth like this. You've got two tough millwrights on the shop floor. The one turns to the other and he says, you know what? You used to be a real butthead, but you're not such a butthead anymore. Two neighbors talking over the fence. You know, everybody else in this neighborhood is polite and everything, which is great. We Canadians are polite. But with you, I get the sense that you're interested in me. You're genuinely interested in my life and my family. On the assembly line, two guys or gals having a conversation. Hey, why is it that when all the other workers on the shift get into a funk, you always seem to be able to find the positive? And what's happening, what's being seasoned through all these conversations, the recurring question that's not being raised, but it's being wondered about, is this: what makes you so different? Like in a positive way. What makes you so different? And I can picture the members of that first church in Acts chapter 2 responding with something like this. You know, if I'm different, it's because I belong to this authentic, supportive church community where we don't just coast through life, but we process life together, the good, the bad, the ugly, and we celebrate the good together. We encourage one another through the bad, and we're just there for one another in the ugly seasons. And I need to tell you, this isn't some airy-fairy kumbaya fellowship. What unites us and what gives us the ability to actually be this kind of faith community is our relationship with God's Son, Jesus Christ. It's all about Jesus Christ.